Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. I never believed in the stories they told about the Ouachita Mountains until what happened to me out there. My name is Marcus Reed, I'm 34 years old, and what I lived through during that weekend still wakes me up at night. It started as a simple RV trip. Just me, my wife Sarah, and our 8-year-old daughter Emma, celebrating my promotion at the engineering firm with a long weekend in Arkansas's most remote wilderness. We'd rented a 30-foot Winnebago and planned to camp at Lake Ouachita, where the October foliage would be at its peak. Sarah had been excited about disconnecting from our hectic lives in Little Rock, and Emma couldn't wait to see the stars without city lights. I should have listened to the old man at the gas station in Mena. "Y'all be careful up in them mountains," he'd said, his weathered hands shaking slightly as he counted our change. "Especially around Devil's Den area. Lots of folks been going missing lately." Sarah had rolled her eyes. "Local folklore," she'd whispered to me. "Every small town has its ghost stories." But the man heard her, his rheumy eyes fixed on Sarah with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I've been living in these parts for 73 years, and I'm telling you, something ain't right up there. The Echo people, they've been active." "Echo people?" Emma had asked, always curious. "Don't fill her head with nonsense," Sarah had said quickly, taking Emma's hand. The old man's expression darkened. "You got a little one with you?" He leaned forward, and I caught a whiff of tobacco and something else. Something sour. "They like the young ones best. Children hear them clearest." That was 3 days ago. Now, as I write this in what's left of our RV, my hands won't stop shaking. The metallic taste of fear coats my tongue, and every shadow seems to move when I'm not looking directly at it. I keep checking the locks on the doors, even though I know they won't keep out what's hunting us. Let me tell you what happened. All of it. Maybe if I write it down, I can make sense of it. Maybe someone will find this and understand what we faced in those mountains. We arrived at the Lake Ouachita Recreation Area around 3 in the afternoon on Friday. The drive up Highway 270 had been beautiful. Rolling hills covered in oak and pine, their leaves just beginning to turn gold and crimson. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and decaying leaves that promised autumn was settling into the Ozarks. The campground was nearly empty, which should have been our first warning. October was peak season for leaf peeping, and Lake Ouachita was a popular destination. But only 3 other RVs dotted the vast camping area, and they all seemed to be clustered together near the main facilities, as if their owners were afraid to venture too far into the woods. "Perfect," Sarah had said, directing me toward a spot near the lake's edge, well away from the other campers. Privacy. I'd parked the Winnebago on a small rise overlooking the water, with dense forest pressing close on 3 sides. The spot was beautiful. Too beautiful, with morning mist rising from the lake and ancient oaks forming a natural cathedral around our camp. Emma had immediately run to the water's edge, her laughter echoing off the hills. That's when I first heard it. Just for a moment, underneath Emma's giggles, I could have sworn I heard another child laughing. The sound seemed to come from across the lake, but when I looked, there was nothing but empty water and trees. "Did you hear that?" I asked Sarah. She was setting up the awning, focused on the task. "Hear what?" "Nothing. Thought I heard another kid." Sarah glanced around the empty campground. "Probably just an echo. Sound carries funny over water." Echo. The word sent an inexplicable chill through me, reminding me of the old man's warning. But I pushed the feeling aside. We were here to relax, to reconnect as a family. I wasn't going to let some backwoods superstition ruin our weekend. That first evening passed peacefully enough. We grilled hamburgers on the RV's outdoor kitchen, and Emma collected interesting rocks while Sarah and I shared a bottle of wine. As darkness fell, we built a small campfire and made s'mores, listening to the night sounds of the forest. Owls hooting, leaves rustling, the occasional splash of a fish jumping in the lake. Emma fell asleep in my lap around 9, marshmallow still sticky on her fingers. Sarah and I decided to turn in early, planning to hike the Ouachita Trail in the morning. It was around 2 a.m. when the whispering started. I woke to the sound of voices outside the RV, low and indistinct. At first, I thought it might be other campers, perhaps returning late from a night of fishing. But as I listened, something seemed off about the voices. They had a strange quality, hollow, as if coming from a great distance. I slipped out of bed carefully, trying not to wake Sarah, and peered through the small window above our dinette. The campground was bathed in silver moonlight, and I could see our campfire had burned down to glowing embers. But there was no one outside. The voices continued, and I realized they seemed to be coming from the forest itself. Multiple voices, men and women and children. Always children mixed in with the adult voices. They were speaking, but I couldn't quite make out the words. It sounded almost like a conversation, with natural pauses and responses, but the language was wrong somehow. A branch snapped near our RV, loud in the still night. I pressed my face closer to the window, trying to see what was out there. For just a moment, I thought I saw movement in the tree line, a pale shape that might have been a face, but when I blinked, it was gone. The whispering stopped abruptly, as if whoever was out there knew I was watching. I stood there for another 10 minutes but heard nothing more. Eventually, I convinced myself it had been my imagination. Maybe the wind in the trees creating sounds that seemed like voices. I crawled back into bed, but sleep didn't come easily. Every small sound, the RV settling, a night bird calling, the distant rumble of a truck on the highway, made me tense. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of children's laughter echoing endlessly through a dark forest. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, with low clouds clinging to the mountainsides. Sarah was already up, making coffee in the RV's compact kitchen. "Sleep okay?" she asked, handing me a steaming mug. "Not really. I kept hearing things outside." "What kind of things?" I hesitated. In the morning light, with bacon sizzling on the stove and Emma humming in the back bedroom, my night fears seemed foolish. Voices, I think. Probably just other campers. Sarah looked through the window at the empty campground. What other campers? She had a point. The 3 RVs I'd seen yesterday were still there, but they showed no signs of life. No campfires, no lights, no activity. They sat dark and silent, like abandoned shells. Maybe they left early, I suggested, though I didn't really believe it. Emma bounced out of the bedroom, already dressed in her hiking boots and the small backpack Sarah had bought her for the trip. "Are we going on the trail today? Can I bring my rock collection?" "We'll find new rocks," Sarah promised. "Maybe some crystals. The Ouachita Mountains are famous for their quartz." We ate breakfast and prepared for our hike. I'd planned a moderate loop trail that would take us about 3 miles through the forest, with a stop at a scenic overlook Sarah had read about online. The trail was well marked according to the park map and rated suitable for families with children. As we walked toward the trailhead, I noticed one of the other RVs had its door standing open. Just standing open, with no one in sight. The morning breeze made the door swing gently back and forth, creating a rhythmic creaking sound. "Should we check if they need help?" Sarah asked, following my gaze. Something about that open door made my skin crawl. I couldn't say why, but every instinct told me to stay away. They probably just went for a walk, but as we passed the RV, I caught a glimpse inside through the open door. The interior was dark, but I could see overturned furniture and what looked like claw marks on the walls. Deep gouges in the wood paneling, as if something large and angry had been trapped inside. I quickened our pace, steering Emma away from the damaged RV. Sarah noticed my urgency but didn't comment, probably thinking I was being overly cautious. The trailhead was marked by a wooden sign carved with the Ouachita Trail's distinctive logo. Below it, someone had scratched additional words into the wood. "Don't listen to them." The scratches looked fresh, the wood still pale where bark had been carved away. "Don't listen to who?" Emma asked, running her finger over the words. "Probably just kids playing a prank," Sarah said, but her voice sounded uncertain. The trail started pleasantly enough, winding through mixed forest of oak, hickory, and pine. Emma chattered constantly, pointing out interesting fungi and unusual leaves, her voice echoing slightly in the close quarters between the trees. The exercise felt good after yesterday's long drive, and gradually I began to relax. About a mile in, we came to a creek crossing. The water ran clear and cold over smooth stones, and Emma immediately wanted to stop and look for minnows. While she waded in the shallows, Sarah and I sat on a fallen log and shared trail mix. "This is nice," Sarah said, leaning against my shoulder. "We should do this more often." I was about to agree when I noticed something odd. Emma was talking animatedly to someone, gesturing toward the water with obvious excitement. But she was alone in the creek. "Emma, who are you talking to?" She looked up at me with confusion. "The other kids. They wanted to know if I found any good rocks." I looked around the empty forest. "What other kids, sweetheart?" "Right there." She pointed toward a thick stand of pine trees on the far side of the creek. "They're playing hide and seek. They said I could play too, but I have to find them first." Sarah and I exchanged glances. There was no one else on the trail. We hadn't seen another hiker all morning. "Emma, come back to this side of the creek, please," Sarah called. "But they're waiting for me. Now." Something in Sarah's tone must have warned Emma not to argue. She splashed back across the creek, water streaming from her boots. As she climbed up the bank, she looked over her shoulder toward the trees. "They're laughing at me," she said, sounding hurt. "That's not very nice." I listened carefully but heard only the sound of water over stones and wind in the branches. Whatever Emma was hearing, it wasn't there, or we couldn't hear it. We continued up the trail, but the peaceful mood was broken. Emma kept turning to look behind us, and once I could have sworn I heard footsteps on the path, matching our pace but staying just out of sight. When I stopped to listen, the sounds stopped too. The scenic overlook turned out to be a disappointment. A small clearing with a partial view of the lake, mostly blocked by overgrown vegetation. But something else was wrong with the spot. The trees around the clearing showed signs of damage, as if they'd been struck repeatedly by something heavy. Bark was missing in long strips, and several smaller trees had been snapped off completely. In the center of the clearing, someone had arranged stones in a rough circle. Inside the circle, the grass was dead and blackened, though there was no sign of fire. The sight made me profoundly uneasy. "We should head back," I said. "Already?" Sarah checked her watch. "We've only been hiking for an hour." "I know, but—" I gestured toward the damaged trees, the dead circle. "Something doesn't feel right about this place." As if to emphasize my point, a sudden wind rose, setting the damaged trees to groaning ominously. The sound was almost like voices, pained, pleading voices. Emma grabbed my hand. "Daddy, I want to go back to the RV now." She looked frightened, her earlier excitement completely gone. That decided it for me. "Come on," I said. "We'll find another trail tomorrow." The hike back seemed to take much longer than the trip up, though I knew that was impossible. The trail stretched ahead of us endlessly, and I began to worry we'd somehow missed a turn. But the path was well marked, with white blazes painted on trees every 100 yards or so. It was Emma who noticed they were changing. "Daddy, why are the marks different now?" I looked at the nearest tree. The white blaze was there, but underneath it, someone had painted a red X. The paint looked fresh, still slightly tacky to the touch. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe the Park Service is marking trees for removal." But as we walked, the red X's became more frequent, appearing on trees that hadn't been marked before. And they weren't just X's. Some were crude drawings that looked almost like stick figures, human shapes with their arms stretched wide as if they were screaming. "Marcus," Sarah whispered, "are we going the right way?" I checked the map and compass, though the overcast sky made it difficult to get a clear bearing. According to my readings, we were heading in the right direction, but the trail seemed different somehow. Narrower, with branches hanging lower, as if the forest was slowly closing in around us. A new sound reached us from ahead, children laughing and calling to each other, the same sounds Emma claimed to have heard earlier. This time, even Sarah and I could hear them clearly. "Finally, other hikers," Sarah said with relief. But something about the laughter bothered me. It had the same hollow quality as the voices I'd heard in the night, and it seemed to come from multiple directions at once, as if we were surrounded by invisible children playing in the trees. Emma stopped walking. "Those aren't nice children," she said quietly. "What do you mean?" "They're saying mean things. About us. About what they want to do to us." A chill ran down my spine. I could hear the laughter clearly now, but to me it sounded like ordinary children at play. If Emma was hearing something different, "What are they saying, Em?" She shook her head, tears starting to form in her eyes. "I don't want to tell you. It's too scary." The laughter was getting closer, seeming to come from just beyond our vision in every direction. I picked up Emma, feeling her small body trembling against my chest. "We need to move faster," I told Sarah. We hurried down the trail, our earlier leisurely pace forgotten. Behind us, the laughter followed, never getting closer but never falling behind. And gradually, I began to make out words in the sound. Not the innocent calls of children at play, but something else entirely. "Come play with us, Emma. Come into the trees, Emma. We have such fun games to show you." Emma pressed her face against my shoulder. "Make them stop, Daddy." But I couldn't make them stop, because I was beginning to understand that they weren't really there. At least, not in any way that mattered. They were something else, something that could speak but had no physical form, something that wanted to lure my daughter away from the safety of the trail. Echo people. The old man's words came back to me with terrifying clarity. The trailhead appeared ahead of us like a beacon of salvation. I'd never been so happy to see a parking lot in my life. We practically ran the last 100 yards, the phantom laughter following us right to the edge of the forest before cutting off abruptly, as if it couldn't exist outside the trees. Our RV stood exactly where we'd left it, solid and reassuring in the afternoon light. I unlocked the door with shaking hands and ushered Sarah and Emma inside, locking it behind us. "What the hell was that?" Sarah demanded once we were safe inside. "I don't know." I was trying to keep my voice calm for Emma's sake, but inside, I was terrified. Maybe some kind of acoustic phenomenon, sound bouncing off the rocks, creating echoes that seemed like voices. Even as I said it, I knew it was bullshit. What we'd experienced on that trail wasn't natural. The red marks on the trees, Emma's ability to hear words that Sarah and I couldn't, the way the laughter had followed us with such deliberate malevolence, none of it could be explained by simple acoustics. Emma had curled up on the dinette bench, hugging her stuffed rabbit. "They wanted me to go with them," she said in a small voice, "into the dark places under the trees. They said they had toys to show me and games to play, but their voices were all wrong, like they were talking from inside a cave. You did the right thing by staying with us," Sarah said, sitting beside Emma and stroking her hair. "Never go anywhere with strangers, remember? Even if they seem friendly." "They weren't strangers," Emma said. "They knew my name. They knew all about me. What toys I like, what my favorite color is, what scares me. They said they've been watching me since we got here." That revelation hit me like a physical blow. If Emma was right, if something had been observing us since our arrival, then we were in more danger than I'd realized. Whatever was happening in these mountains, we'd walked right into the middle of it. I went to the window and peered out at the forest. In daylight, it looked innocent enough, just trees and shadows and the normal chaos of nature. But now I knew that appearances could be deceiving. Something lived in those woods. Something that could speak and think and plan. Something that wanted my daughter. "We should leave," I said. "What?" Sarah looked at me in surprise. "Marcus, we just got here yesterday. You've been planning this trip for months." "I know, but..." I struggled to find words that wouldn't sound completely insane. "I think there might be some kind of local gang activity. Drug dealers using the forest, maybe. That would explain the voices, the strange behavior. You think drug dealers are playing hide-and-seek in the woods and talking to our 8-year-old daughter?" Sarah's voice carried a note of skepticism that made me realize how ridiculous I sounded. "I think something is very wrong here, and I think we should trust our instincts and leave before it gets worse." Sarah looked at Emma, who was listening to our conversation with wide eyes. "Let's talk about this outside." We stepped out onto the RV's small porch, leaving the door cracked so we could hear Emma but hopefully keep our voices from frightening her further. "Okay," Sarah said, crossing her arms. "What's really going on? And don't give me any bullshit about drug dealers." I told her about the voices I'd heard in the night, about the damaged RV with its door standing open, about the way the trail markers had changed as we walked. I told her about the old man's warning and my growing certainty that we were dealing with something beyond ordinary explanation. Sarah listened without interruption, but I could see the doubt in her expression. She was a rational woman, a high school science teacher who dealt in facts and evidence. What I was describing sounded like the product of an overactive imagination. "Marcus, I think you're letting that old man's stories get to you," she said finally. "Emma has always had an active imagination, you know that. She still talks to her stuffed animals like they're real. And as for the voices and the trail markers, there could be perfectly logical explanations for all of it." Then explain the RV with the claw marks inside. "What claw marks? You saw some overturned furniture and assumed—" "I know what I saw, Sarah." "Do you? Because right now you sound like someone who's looking for problems where none exist." I wanted to argue further, but a sound from inside the RV stopped me cold. Emma was talking to someone, having a conversation with distinct pauses as if listening to responses. We rushed back inside to find Emma standing at the rear window, looking out into the forest. She was speaking in a low, careful voice, as if trying not to be overheard. "I can't," she was saying. "My mommy and daddy won't let me. They said I have to stay inside." "Emma, who are you talking to?" Sarah demanded. Emma turned to face us, and I was shocked by the change in her expression. Her eyes looked older somehow, filled with a knowledge that no 8-year-old should possess. "They're right outside," she said calmly. "They want to show me something special, something only children can see." I looked through the window but saw nothing except trees and gathering shadows as afternoon faded toward evening. "Emma, there's no one out there." "Yes, there is." Her voice carried absolute certainty. "They're all around the RV now, watching and waiting. They said they'll wait as long as it takes." "As long as what takes?" Emma tilted her head as if listening to something only she could hear. "Until I'm ready to come out and play their games." Sarah knelt down in front of Emma, taking her hands gently. "Sweetheart, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Sometimes when we're in new places, our imaginations can play tricks on us. There are no children outside. It's just us here." "They're not children," Emma said matter-of-factly. "They just look like children and sound like children. But they're much, much older than that." The temperature inside the RV seemed to drop 10 degrees. I could see my breath fogging slightly as Emma continued to speak in that eerily adult voice. "They told me about the other families who came here, about what happened to them when the children went out to play. They showed me pictures in my head, pictures of empty tents and RVs and clothes scattered in the woods, and bones that animals wouldn't even eat because they tasted wrong." "Emma, stop it." Sarah's voice was sharp with fear now. "Stop saying things like that." "They don't like it when grown-ups try to interfere," Emma continued as if she hadn't heard. "That's when they get angry. That's when they stop pretending to be nice." As if summoned by her words, something began scratching at the outside of the RV. Long, deliberate scrapes that sounded like fingernails on aluminum, starting at the rear and moving slowly toward the front. The scratching was methodical, as if whatever was out there was testing the walls for weak points. Sarah grabbed Emma and pulled her away from the windows. I ran to the driver's compartment and started the engine, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. "We're leaving," I announced. "Right now." But as I put the RV in gear and tried to drive away from our campsite, the engine sputtered and died. I tried again, and again it failed to catch. On the third attempt, nothing happened at all, not even the clicking of the starter. "What's wrong?" Sarah called from the back. "I don't know. It won't start." I popped the hood and grabbed a flashlight from the emergency kit. What I found under the hood made my blood run cold. Every wire had been severed with surgical precision. The battery cables, the ignition wires, the fuel lines, all of them cut cleanly through as if someone had taken a razor blade to the entire electrical system. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that the cuts were fresh, still weeping drops of battery acid and fuel. Someone, or something, had done this while we were inside the RV, talking not 10 feet away from the engine compartment. I slammed the hood and ran back inside, locking the door behind me. "We can't drive out," I told Sarah. "Someone sabotaged the engine." "Who would do that?" Before I could answer, Emma spoke up from her position by the window. "They don't want us to leave yet. They said we have to stay for the games." The scratching sounds were getting louder, more aggressive. I could hear multiple sources now, as if a dozen sets of claws were raking the RV's exterior walls. And, underneath the scratching, I could make out voices. The same hollow, echoing voices I'd heard in the forest, but closer now, much closer. "Come out, Emma. Come out and play. We have such wonderful games to share." Emma pressed her face against the glass, her breath fogging the window. "They're showing me the games now. In my head. I can see them all. Emma, get away from the window." But she didn't move. Couldn't move, it seemed. She stood transfixed, watching something that only she could see, while the voices outside grew louder and more insistent. "The hiding game, Emma. The searching game. The running game that never ends." "What did they look like?" I asked, desperate to understand what we were facing. Emma's voice was dreamy, distant. "Like children, but their eyes are too old. And they're too pale, like they've been underground for a long time. And when they smile, their teeth are too sharp." The scratching stopped abruptly, leaving behind a silence that was somehow worse than the noise had been. I could feel them out there, circling our RV like predators, waiting for the right moment to strike. "They're getting impatient," Emma whispered. "They don't like waiting." A new sound reached us, tapping on the roof as if something was walking up there. Light footsteps that moved from one end of the RV to the other, pausing directly over where we stood. Tap, tap, tap. The footsteps stopped above Emma's head. "She can hear us best," Emma said, still staring out the window. "That's what they're saying. Children always hear them best. That's why they need me to come outside." "You're not going anywhere," Sarah said firmly, wrapping her arms around Emma. "But they'll get angry if I don't come soon. And when they get angry, they stop playing games. They start doing other things instead." As if to demonstrate, something heavy slammed into the side of the RV, rocking it violently. Then another impact, and another, each one stronger than the last. Our dishes rattled in their cabinets, and I could hear the aluminum siding beginning to buckle under the assault. I grabbed my cell phone, praying for signal. 1 bar, barely enough to make a call. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers. 911, what's your emergency?" "We're trapped at Lake Ouachita Recreation Area. Someone is attacking our RV, trying to break in. We need help immediately." "Sir, can you describe the attackers?" I looked out the window into the growing darkness. I could see shapes moving in the forest, pale forms that seemed to drift between the trees rather than walk. Too many to count, and all of them focused on our RV with single-minded determination. I'm not sure. There are multiple subjects, possibly armed with knives or other cutting tools. They've sabotaged our vehicle and we can't escape. We're dispatching units to your location, sir. Stay inside and keep your doors locked. Do not attempt to confront the attackers." The call ended, leaving us alone with the sound of something scratching at our door. Not random scratching this time, but deliberate patterns, as if whatever was out there was trying to spell out words with its claws. Emma tilted her head, listening. "They're writing their names," she said. "All the names of all the children they used to be, before they became Echo people. What happened to them? They got lost in the woods a long time ago. And when they called for help, only the Echoes answered. The Echoes that live in the dark places under the mountains. The Echoes taught them new games, hungry games, and now they can never leave." The scratching on the door was becoming more frantic, as if our unseen tormentors were running out of patience. I could hear them moving around the RV, testing windows and vents, looking for any way inside. "They want me to open the door," Emma said suddenly. "They're asking very nicely. They said please." "Emma, no matter what they say, you do not open that door. Do you understand me?" but even as I spoke, I saw Emma's hand reaching toward the door handle. Her movements were slow and dreamlike, as if she was sleepwalking. "Emma!" Sarah lunged forward and grabbed Emma's wrist just as her fingers touched the metal handle. The moment Sarah made contact with Emma, something outside the RV let out a shriek of rage, a sound like tearing metal mixed with the cry of a dying animal. The RV rocked violently, and I heard the sound of something large and angry throwing itself against our walls. Emma blinked as if waking from a trance. "Mommy, why are you holding my hand so tight?" "Because I love you," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "And I'm never going to let anything hurt you." The assault on the RV intensified. Whatever was outside was no longer playing games. I could hear the aluminum siding being torn away in great sheets, exposing the insulation and interior walls beneath. Our sanctuary was being systematically destroyed around us. "The bedroom," I said. "It's the most interior room, furthest from the walls." We retreated to the back of the RV, huddling together on the bed while the sounds of destruction grew closer. The walls were so thin, I could see them flexing inward with each impact. Soon, they would give way entirely. Emma was crying now, finally showing her age instead of that disturbing adult calm. "I'm scared, Daddy. They're so angry. They're saying terrible things about what they're going to do to us." "What kind of things?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "They want to take us apart, piece by piece, and put us back together wrong, like a puzzle made of bones and fear. They say it doesn't hurt much, not after the first few minutes." A new sound reached us, the whine of sirens in the distance, growing closer. The police were coming, just as the dispatcher had promised. Help was on the way. But the creatures outside seemed to hear the sirens too, and they didn't sound pleased. Their attacks on the RV became even more vicious, as if they were trying to break through before the authorities arrived. One of the bedroom windows exploded inward, spraying us with glass and letting in a wave of freezing air that carried the stench of rotting leaves and old bones. Through the broken window, I caught my first clear glimpse of what was hunting us. It might have been a child once, decades or even centuries ago, but whatever it was now bore only the faintest resemblance to human form. Its skin was the color of old parchment, stretched tight over a frame that seemed to have too many joints in all the wrong places. Its eyes were pools of absolute darkness, and when it smiled at me through the shattered window, I saw row after row of needle-sharp teeth. "Hello, Emma's daddy," it said in a voice like wind through a graveyard. "We've been waiting so long to meet you." I grabbed a camping chair and swung it at the thing's head. The aluminum connected with a wet, tearing sound, and the creature fell backward out of sight. But I could hear others taking its place, pressing against the broken window, trying to squeeze their impossible bodies through the opening. The sirens were very close now, maybe half a mile away. Red and blue lights flickered through the trees, casting wild shadows that made everything seem to move and shift. "They're almost here," Sarah sobbed. "The police are almost here," but Emma shook her head sadly. "It won't matter," she said. "The Echo people don't like visitors. They'll make the police go away, just like they made the other families go away." "What do you mean?" "They'll whisper to them. Tell them there's nothing wrong here, nothing to see. The grown-ups will believe the whispers because they want to. It's easier than believing the truth." The siren stopped abruptly, though the red and blue lights continued to flicker in the distance. I waited for the sound of car doors slamming, for authoritative voices calling out to us. But there was only silence. Then, after several long minutes, the police cars drove away. Emma nodded sadly. "They told the police we weren't here, that this was just an empty campground, nothing but shadows and wind. The police believed them because it's easier to believe than to see what's really hiding in the woods." Despair crashed over me like a physical weight. No one was coming to help us. We were alone in the wilderness with creatures that existed outside the normal rules of reality, beings that could manipulate perception and memory with nothing more than whispers. The attacks on the RV resumed with renewed fury. More windows shattered, letting in the cold mountain air and the stench of decay. I could see pale hands reaching through the openings, grasping blindly for anything they could reach. "There has to be a way out," I said, more to myself than to Sarah and Emma. "Every problem has a solution. Every trap has an escape. But even as I spoke, I knew we were running out of time. The RV's walls were failing, our hiding places were being destroyed one by one, and soon there would be nowhere left to run. That's when Emma spoke up with sudden determination. I have to go to them. No. Sarah's voice was fierce. Absolutely not. It's the only way. They don't really want you and Daddy. You're too old to hear them properly. They want me because I can understand their games. If I go with them willingly, they might let you live. Emma, we are not sacrificing you to save ourselves. We'll find another way. But I could see in Emma's eyes that she'd already made up her mind. She'd inherited Sarah's stubborn streak and my tendency to try to solve problems by taking action, even when action seemed impossible. I love you, Mommy and Daddy, she said quietly. Remember that. No matter what happens next, before either of us could stop her, Emma slipped out of our grasp and ran toward the front of the RV. I heard the door unlock with a soft click, and then she was outside, disappearing into the darkness beyond our failing sanctuary. Emma! Sarah screamed, lunging after her. I caught Sarah around the waist, holding her back from the shattered doorway. You can't go out there. That's what they want. Let me go. That's our daughter. Through the broken windows, I could hear Emma's voice calling out to the creatures in the forest. I'm here. I came like you asked. Now leave my parents alone. The assault on the RV stopped instantly. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the noise had been, because it meant they had what they wanted. They had Emma. I released Sarah, and we both rushed to the front window, peering out into the moonlit campground. Emma stood in a small clearing about 20 feet from the RV, her small figure dwarfed by the towering trees. Around her, barely visible in the shifting shadows, pale shapes began to emerge from the forest. They moved wrong, these echo people. Their limbs bent at impossible angles, and they seemed to glide rather than walk, as if their feet never quite touched the ground. As they drew closer to Emma, I could see their faces more clearly. Ancient, predatory features wearing the grotesque mask of childhood innocence. We're so happy you came to play, one of them said in a voice like rustling leaves. We have such wonderful games to show you. Emma stood perfectly still as the creatures circled her, their movements hypnotic and ritualistic. You promised you'd let my parents go if I came with you. Oh, we will, another echo person said, this one wearing the tattered remains of what might once have been a Girl Scout uniform. We'll let them go, eventually. After they've played our games too. That wasn't the deal. The lead creature, the one I'd struck with the chair, though it showed no sign of injury, tilted its head at an unnatural angle. Deals change, little Emma. Rules change. That's what makes our game so much fun. I couldn't stand by and watch any longer. Whatever these things were, whatever they wanted, they weren't getting my daughter without a fight. Sarah, when I go out there, you run for the trees on the other side of the campground. Find the main road and flag down help. Marcus, no. Someone has to survive this. Someone has to tell people what happened here. I grabbed the heaviest object I could find, a cast-iron skillet from the kitchen, and kicked open what remained of the RV's door. The cold night air hit me like a slap, carrying with it the overwhelming stench of decay and something else, something that made my sinuses burn and my eyes water. Let her go, I shouted, brandishing the skillet like a weapon. The echo people turned to look at me with their bottomless eyes, and several of them laughed, a sound like glass breaking in a distant room. Emma's daddy wants to play too, the leader said with obvious delight. How wonderful. It's been so long since we had a complete family. Emma turned to face me, and I was horrified to see that her eyes had changed. They held the same ancient knowledge I'd seen in the creatures' faces, as if something fundamental about her was already being altered. You shouldn't have come out, Daddy, she said in a voice that was still recognizably hers but carried new harmonics, new depths. Now, they'll never let any of us leave. Emma, fight it. Whatever they're doing to you, fight it. But even as I spoke, I could see more changes occurring. Emma's skin was growing paler, taking on the same parchment-like quality as the echo people. Her hair was darkening, and when she smiled at me, I glimpsed teeth that seemed sharper than they should be. It doesn't hurt, she said with disturbing calm. It's actually kind of nice. Like falling asleep, but staying awake at the same time. They're showing me all their games, Daddy. Games that go on forever and ever. The circle of echo people began to close around both Emma and me. I swung the skillet at the nearest one, and it connected with a sound like hitting wet leather. The creature staggered but didn't fall, and its wound began to seal itself almost immediately. "Iron hurts them," I called back to Sarah. "Find anything made of iron." But when I looked back toward the RV, Sarah was gone. Good. At least one of us might make it out of this nightmare alive. The echo people pressed closer, their movements becoming more aggressive now that their patience was exhausted. Claws that looked like twisted fingernails raked the air inches from my face, and I could feel their cold breath on my skin. "Join us, Emma's daddy," the leader whispered. "Join us in the eternal games. Time means nothing here. Pain means nothing. There is only the hunt, and the hiding, and the finding, and the taking." Emma was watching the proceedings with those newly ancient eyes, and I realized with growing horror that she was no longer entirely on our side. Whatever transformation they were working on her had progressed far enough that her loyalties were shifting. "Emma, please," I begged, "remember who you are. Remember your family, your life, your toys and your friends and your favorite books. Don't let them take that away from you." For a moment, her expression flickered, and I saw a trace of the little girl I'd raised. "Daddy, I can't remember my favorite book. I know I had one, but I can't remember what it was called." "Green Eggs and Ham," I said desperately. "You've made me read it to you 1,000 times. You know every word by heart." Emma frowned, pressing her hands to her temples. "Green, eggs, I remember eggs, but not green ones. That doesn't sound right." The echo people hissed in unison, clearly displeased by this interruption in their ritual. Several of them moved toward me with obvious hostile intent, but their leader held up a hand to stop them. "Memories fade," it said to Emma in a sickeningly gentle voice. "Old memories belong to old lives. You have a new life now, with us. New games to play, new friends to meet. Isn't that exciting?" "Yes," Emma said slowly, the confusion leaving her face. "New games sound fun." I felt my heart break as I watched my daughter slip further away from us, becoming something else entirely. But I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. "Emma, what's your stuffed rabbit's name?" I called out. She paused, looking genuinely puzzled. "Rabbit? Mr. Buttons. You named him when you were 3 years old because he had button eyes. You take him everywhere. He's in the RV right now, waiting for you to come back." I don't." Emma looked around in growing distress. There was something important. Something I was supposed to remember. "But I can't," the lead echo person snarled, its facade of gentleness cracking to reveal the predator beneath. "Enough. The child is ours now. Her old life is ending. Her new life beginning. You cannot stop the transformation." "Maybe not," I said, raising the skillet again. "But I can make it cost you something." I charged toward Emma, hoping to break through the circle and reach her before the creatures could react. For a moment it seemed like I might succeed. The echo people were focused on their ritual and didn't expect a direct assault. But they were faster than any human could be. Claws raked across my back, tearing through my jacket and shirt like paper. I stumbled but kept moving, driven by desperate parental instinct. I reached Emma just as her transformation accelerated. Her skin was now completely pale, almost translucent, and I could see dark veins pulsing beneath the surface. When she looked at me, her eyes held no recognition at all. "Who are you?" she asked in a voice that no longer sounded entirely human. The question hit me harder than any physical blow. In the space of minutes, I had lost my daughter completely. Whatever Emma had been, whatever made her unique and precious and mine, was gone. In her place stood something that wore her face but possessed an alien mind. "I'm your father," I whispered, knowing it was hopeless but unable to stop trying. She tilted her head, studying me with the cold curiosity of a predator examining its prey. "Father? I don't understand that word." The echo people pressed closer, their excitement palpable. The transformation was nearly complete, and soon they would have a new member for their eternal games. That's when I heard the sound of an engine approaching through the forest. At first, I thought it might be the police returning, or perhaps park rangers responding to a delayed report. But the sound was wrong. Too heavy, too mechanical. It sounded like construction equipment, or maybe a logging truck. The Echo people heard it too, and for the first time since this nightmare began, they looked concerned. Several of them retreated toward the tree line, their pale forms becoming even more insubstantial in the moonlight. "What is that?" the leader hissed, its ancient eyes scanning the forest. The engine sound grew louder, accompanied by the crash of breaking branches and the grinding of heavy machinery pushing through underbrush. Whatever was coming, it was big, and it wasn't following any established trail. Emma, or the thing that had been Emma, suddenly screamed. Not in fear, but in what sounded like physical agony. She clutched at her head, doubling over as if something was causing her intense pain. "Make it stop!" she cried, and for a moment her voice sounded completely human again. "It hurts so much." The Echo people were retreating faster now, some of them already disappearing entirely into the shadows between the trees. Whatever was approaching represented a threat they couldn't or wouldn't face. "The iron!" Emma gasped between screams. "There's so much iron coming." "It burns, Daddy. It burns." A massive bulldozer crashed through the tree line, its steel blade gleaming in the moonlight. But this wasn't any ordinary construction equipment. Symbols had been painted all over its surface in what looked like white paint, geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. And riding in the operator's cage, controlling the machine with expert precision, was the old man from the gas station. The bulldozer's engine was even louder up close, a diesel roar that seemed to physically push against the supernatural atmosphere the Echo people had created. More importantly, the machine was made almost entirely of iron and steel, materials that clearly caused the creatures intense discomfort. The Echo people fled en masse, their forms dissolving into mist and shadow as they retreated into the deeper forest. Within seconds, Emma and I were alone in the campground. The only sounds the rumble of the bulldozer's engine and my daughter's continued cries of pain. The old man shut off the machine and climbed down from the operator's seat, moving with surprising agility for his age. He carried an old canvas bag filled with objects that clinked metallically as he walked. "You didn't listen to my warning," he said, but his tone held no accusation. "Most folks don't. First time they come up here." Emma was still doubled over, tears streaming down her face. But as the Echo people's influence faded, I could see color returning to her skin, and the dark veins beneath the surface growing fainter. "Help her," I begged. "Please, whatever you can do to help her." The old man knelt beside Emma and pulled a small iron cross from his bag. The moment it came near her, she screamed again, but this time the scream sounded more like Emma and less like the thing she'd been becoming. "Hold still, child," the old man said gently. "This is going to hurt some more, but it's the only way to burn out what they put inside you." He touched the cross to Emma's forehead, and she convulsed as if she'd been hit by electricity. But when the spasm passed, her eyes were clear and human again. "Daddy?" she whispered, and her voice was completely her own. I gathered her into my arms, hardly believing that we'd somehow been saved. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here." The old man was already moving around the campground, pulling more iron objects from his bag. Nails, horseshoes, old railroad spikes. He began hammering them into trees in a specific pattern, creating what I realized was a protective barrier. "Name's Vernon," he said as he worked. "Vernon Hollis. Been fighting the Echo people for nigh on 40 years now, ever since they took my grandson." "How did you know we were in trouble?" "Heard about the police getting turned around, driving right past your location like it wasn't there. That's their signature move. Makes folks invisible to outside help until it's too late. Lucky for you, I don't need outside help." Sarah emerged from the forest on the far side of the campground, looking disheveled but alive. She ran to us, and we had a brief, tearful reunion before Vernon interrupted. "We ain't safe yet," he warned. "Iron keeps 'em at bay, but it don't destroy 'em. Soon as the sun comes up, they'll retreat to their deep places, but they'll be back tomorrow night. And every night after that, long as you stay in their territory. Then we'll leave, I said. Right now. Vernon shook his head. Your RV's torn to pieces, and they sabotaged the engine besides. But I got a truck parked about a mile back, hidden where they can't find it. We can walk out come morning, if you're willing to trust me. I looked at my family. Sarah, exhausted and frightened. Emma, slowly recovering from her ordeal but still pale and shaken. We had no choice but to trust this strange old man who'd appeared like an answer to prayer. Why do you do this? I asked Vernon as he continued setting up his iron defenses. Why risk your life helping strangers? His weathered face grew sad in the moonlight. Because 40 years ago, I was just like you. Came up here with my daughter and grandson for a nice family camping trip. Didn't believe the old stories. Figured I was too smart to fall for local superstitions. He paused in his work, staring into the dark forest. Echo people got my grandson first. Little Tommy, he was just 6 years old. Started hearing voices, same as your Emma did. By the time I realized what was happening, they'd already started changing him. What happened to him? I tried to save him, just like you tried to save your girl. But I didn't have the knowledge I got now. Didn't understand about the iron and the protective symbols. Tommy, he became one of them, completely. And my daughter, she couldn't live with what she'd seen. Took her own life 6 months later. The weight of Vernon's loss settled over our small group like a shroud. This man had sacrificed everything to learn how to fight creatures that most people didn't even believe existed. I'm sorry, I said, knowing the words were inadequate. Don't be sorry. Be grateful. And be warned. The Echo people, they got long memories and longer grudges. They'll remember your family now, remember your scent and your voices. You can't ever come back to this part of Arkansas, and you need to be careful about any place that has similar conditions. Okay? What kind of conditions? Limestone caves mostly, deep underground water systems, places where sound carries strange and voices echo back changed. The Echo people, they live in the spaces between the echoes, in the silence that exists for just a moment before sound bounces back. That's how they travel, how they hunt. They follow the echoes from place to place, looking for new victims. Emma stirred in my arms. I can still hear them, she whispered, far away now, but they're still calling my name. Vernon pulled another iron object from his bag, a small pendant shaped like a horseshoe. Wear this around your neck, child. Don't take it off, not ever. It'll help keep their voices out of your head. As he fastened the pendant around Emma's neck, I noticed that his hands were covered in scars. Old cuts and burns that spoke of decades spent handling iron weapons and protective charms. How many families have you saved? Sarah asked. Dozens, over the years. But I lost dozens more before I learned how to fight them properly. The Echo people, they're patient predators. They can afford to wait, to study their prey, to learn their weaknesses. Most folks don't realize they're being hunted until it's far too late. We spent the rest of the night huddled inside Vernon's iron barrier, listening to distant sounds from the forest. Calls and whispers that might have been wind in the trees, or might have been something else entirely. Emma slept fitfully in my arms, occasionally murmuring in her sleep, but her words were human words in human language. As dawn approached, the forest gradually fell silent. The oppressive atmosphere that had surrounded us all night began to lift, replaced by the normal sounds of morning. Birds calling, insects buzzing, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. They're gone, Vernon announced, beginning to collect his iron protections. Retreated to their deep places until nightfall. We can move now, but we need to move fast. It's a long walk to my truck, and we want to be well clear of their territory before the sun sets again. We gathered what we could salvage from the destroyed RV, some clothes, important documents, and Emma's stuffed rabbit, which she clutched tightly as we prepared to leave. The campground looked different in daylight, less ominous, but somehow sadder. I could see now that other RVs scattered around the area were actually abandoned, their owners long gone and their vehicles slowly being reclaimed by the forest. How long has this been going on? I asked Vernon as we started our hike out. The Echo people. They've been here since before the first settlers arrived. Cherokee used to tell stories about the Whisper Children, spirits that lived in the caves and lured people to their deaths. But the Cherokee were smart enough to stay away from their hunting grounds. White folks, we always think we know better than the people who lived here first. The walk to Vernon's truck took us through some of the most beautiful wilderness I'd ever seen. Under different circumstances, I would have enjoyed the hike, the stunning vistas of the Ouachita Mountains, the brilliant fall foliage painting the hillsides in gold and crimson. But knowing what lurked in these forests, I couldn't appreciate the natural beauty. Every shadow seemed to hide watching eyes. Every echo of our footsteps sounded like pursuit. Emma walked between Sarah and me, holding both our hands and wearing Vernon's protective pendant. She seemed mostly recovered from her ordeal, but I noticed she flinched whenever she heard unexpected sounds, and she refused to look directly into the deeper parts of the forest. "Will they follow us?" she asked Vernon during one of our rest stops. "Not far from their territory," he assured her. Echo people are tied to specific places, the caves and hollows where the acoustics are just right for their kind of hunting, but they'll remember you, like I said. And if you ever come back to similar places—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. We all understood the warning. Vernon's truck was exactly where he'd said it would be, hidden in a grove of pine trees about 10 miles from the campground. It was an old Ford pickup, probably from the 1980s, but it looked well maintained despite its age. The bed was filled with camping gear and what I now recognized as Vernon's collection of iron weapons and protective charms. "Where can we drop you, folks?" he asked as we climbed into the cab. "Little Rock," I said. "We've got a hotel reservation there for tonight." It seemed surreal to think about returning to normal life after what we'd experienced, but what choice did we have? The drive back to civilization passed mostly in silence. Emma dozed against Sarah's shoulder, exhausted by her ordeal. Sarah stared out the window at the passing landscape, and I could see her trying to process what had happened to us. Vernon drove with the focused attention of a man who'd spent decades navigating dangerous territory. As we reached the outskirts of Little Rock, Vernon pulled over at a truck stop. "This is where we part ways," he said. "But before you go, I need you to understand something. What happened to your family up there, it's going to change you. You're going to have nightmares, going to jump at shadows, going to question things you used to take for granted. That's normal. That's the price of surviving something most folks don't survive at all." He reached into his glove compartment and pulled out a business card, just his name and a phone number. "You ever need someone to talk to about what you experienced, someone who'll believe you, you call that number. And if you ever hear about other folks going missing in places like the Ouachitas, you give them my number too. Sometimes the only way to fight monsters is to make sure people know they exist." We thanked Vernon as best we could, knowing that words could never adequately express our gratitude. This man had literally saved our lives, and probably our souls as well. As his truck disappeared into traffic, we stood in the parking lot of the truck stop trying to figure out what came next. We had no car, no camping gear, no vacation to return to. But we were alive, and we were together, and that was more than we'd had any right to expect 12 hours ago. "How do we explain this to people?" Sarah asked. "The insurance company, our friends, Emma's school? We don't," I said. "We tell them there was an accident, that our RV was damaged and we had to cut the trip short. The truth is too dangerous to share with people who aren't ready to believe it." Emma looked up at us with those eyes that had seen too much for an 8-year-old. "Are we going to be okay, Daddy?" I knelt down and hugged her tightly, feeling the warmth of her human body against mine and the steady rhythm of her human heartbeat. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going to be okay. It might take some time and it might not be easy, but we're going to be okay." That was 6 months ago. We never went back to the Ouachita Mountains, and we never will. Vernon calls occasionally to check on us, and we've compared notes about other incidents in similar locations around the country. There are more echo people out there than most people realize, in caves and hollows across the American wilderness, waiting for families like ours to venture too far from the safety of civilization. Emma still has nightmares sometimes, and she refuses to go camping or hiking. She keeps Vernon's iron pendant around her neck at all times, even in the shower. But she's healing, slowly but surely. Children are resilient, and with time and patience, Even the worst trauma can be overcome. Sarah and I are working through our own recovery. We found a therapist who specializes in trauma. We didn't tell her the whole truth, but we told her enough that she could help us process what we'd experienced. Some days are better than others. I'm writing this account now because Vernon asked me to. He's getting older, and he worries about what will happen when he's no longer able to patrol those mountains and rescue families like ours. He wants there to be a record, evidence that others can point to if they encounter similar situations. So, if you're reading this, if you've stumbled across this story somehow, please take its warning seriously. There are places in this world where ancient predators still hunt, where the normal rules don't apply, where a family camping trip can become a fight for survival against things that shouldn't exist. Stay away from isolated places with extensive cave systems. Don't camp alone in wilderness areas where other campers have gone missing. And if you're ever in a place where your children start hearing voices that you can't hear, where echoes seem to carry words that were never spoken, get out immediately. Don't try to rationalize it. Don't convince yourself it's just imagination. Run. Because some games, once you start playing them, never end. And in the deep places under the mountains, the echo people are always listening, always waiting, always ready to teach new players the rules of their eternal games. I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, certain I can hear Emma's voice calling to me from somewhere far away. But when I go to check on her, she's always safe in her bed, clutching Mr. Buttons and breathing the steady rhythm of normal human sleep. She's safe. We're all safe, for now. But sometimes in the quiet moments between sleeping and waking, I can still hear them calling our names. And I know that somewhere in the Arkansas mountains, in caves that go deeper than any map shows, the echo people remember us. They remember, and they wait, and they're always ready to play their games again. They warned us, locals always do. But we laughed. My name's Rebecca Hill. I had just turned 34 when we arrived at Fish Lake National Forest, and it was the worst mistake of our lives. The RV rental lot in Salt Lake City buzzed with the typical chaos of summer vacation season. Families loading coolers, kids running between the massive vehicles, and the smell of diesel exhaust mixing with mountain air. Tom and I had been planning this trip for months. Our first real vacation since the divorce papers were finalized. Not a romantic getaway, mind you, but something we'd promised our daughter Emma we'd do together before she started high school. One last family trip, even if we weren't technically a family anymore. "Dad, can we get the one with the slide out?" Emma bounced on her toes, pointing at a gleaming 30-foot Winnebago that probably cost more than my car. Tom chuckled, his first genuine smile I'd seen in weeks. "Let's see what we can afford, kiddo." The rental agent, a weathered man in his 60s with calloused hands and knowing eyes, looked over our paperwork. "Fish Lake, eh? Beautiful country up there. You folks sticking to the main campgrounds?" "We were hoping to find something more secluded," Tom said, pulling out his phone to show the GPS coordinates he'd found on some off-the-grid camping forum. "Maybe do some real wilderness camping." The old man's expression shifted, his smile fading just enough that I noticed. "That's pretty far out. You sure about that spot?" "Is there a problem?" I asked. He shrugged, but his eyes lingered on our destination marker. Well, we've had some folks come back early from that area. Equipment failures mostly. GPS acting up, that sort of thing." He paused, then seemed to shake it off. "But hey, you look like experienced folks. I'm sure you'll be fine." 20 minutes later, we were pulling out of the lot in a 26-foot Coachman Freelander, Emma already claimed the dinette table for her art supplies, and Tom programming our route into the navigation system. The rental agent's warning felt like nothing more than small-town superstition in the bright afternoon sun. The drive through Utah's high country was spectacular. Rolling hills gave way to dense forests of aspen and pine, their colors just starting to hint at the coming autumn. Emma had her sketch pad out, trying to capture the landscape rushing past our windows, while Tom hummed along to classic rock on the radio. For a few hours, it felt like old times. Before the fights, before the lawyers, before everything fell apart. "Look at that." Tom pointed toward a massive grove of aspen trees, their white trunks stretching endlessly up the mountainside. They say that's actually one organism. All those trees connected underground. Emma wrinkled her nose. That's creepy. Like a giant spider or something. I laughed, but something about the image stuck with me. All those separate trees, looking independent but secretly connected, sharing resources and information through hidden networks. It reminded me of something, though I couldn't place what. We reached the turnoff for Fish Lake around 4 in the afternoon. The paved road gave way to gravel, then to dirt, and finally to something that barely qualified as a trail. The RV lurched and groaned with each pothole, our dishes rattling in the cabinets despite Tom's careful driving. "Are you sure this is right?" I asked, checking the GPS for the 10th time. The signal had gotten spotty 20 minutes ago, the screen flickering between our location and a blank gray void. "The coordinates match," Tom said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Should be just another mile or two." The forest grew denser as we climbed, the afternoon sun filtering through the canopy in scattered beams that seemed to move with their own purpose. Emma had stopped sketching, pressing her face to the window instead. "Mom, do you see that?" I followed her gaze. Between the trees, maybe 50 yards off the road, stood what looked like an old cabin, or what was left of one. The roof had partially collapsed and vines had claimed most of the walls, but there was something about it that made my skin crawl. The windows, or what remained of them, seemed to be watching us. "Probably an old hunting lodge," Tom said, but he'd slowed the RV to get a better look. "This area's been logged for over a century. As we passed, I could have sworn I saw movement in one of those dark window frames. A pale shape that shifted back into the shadows as soon as I focused on it. I almost said something, but then the road curved and the cabin disappeared behind the trees. 10 minutes later, we emerged into a clearing that took my breath away. A small meadow stretched out before us, surrounded by towering pines and crossed by a clear mountain stream. The setting sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber, and the only sounds were the whisper of wind through branches and the gentle babble of water over stones. "This is perfect," Emma breathed, already reaching for her camera. Tom parked the RV at the edge of the clearing, and we spent the next hour setting up camp. The propane worked fine, the water pump kicked in without issue, and the generator hummed to life when Tom tested it. Everything seemed normal, even ideal. It wasn't until we were sitting around our campfire that evening, roasting marshmallows and watching the stars emerge, that I noticed the silence. "Where are all the animals?" I asked suddenly. Tom looked up from poking at the fire. "What do you mean?" "We haven't heard anything. No owls, no coyotes, not even crickets. Shouldn't there be sounds?" Emma paused, a marshmallow halfway to her mouth. Now that I'd mentioned it, the quiet was oppressive. Not peaceful. Oppressive. Like the whole forest was holding its breath. "Maybe we scared them off with the RV," Tom suggested. But he was listening now, too, his head tilted slightly. "Give them time to get used to us." But as the night wore on, the silence only deepened. Even the wind seemed muted, and our own voices sounded strangely flat, as if the air itself was absorbing the sound. When we finally retreated to the RV around 11, I found myself checking the locks twice. I woke sometime in the small hours to the sound of Emma crying, not sobbing or whimpering. A low, steady keening that raised every hair on my arms. I slipped out of the master bed, careful not to wake Tom, and padded toward the dinette where Emma slept on the converted table. The RV's LED strips cast everything in a pale blue glow. Emma sat upright on her makeshift bed, but her eyes were closed. The sound was coming from her throat, a wordless lament that seemed to go on and on without her taking a breath. In the dim light, her face looked wrong. Too pale, too still, like a wax figure. "Emma?" I whispered, reaching out to touch her shoulder. The crying stopped instantly. Her eyes snapped open, but for a moment they didn't focus on me. They stared past me, toward the RV's back window, and in their depths I saw something I'd never seen in my daughter's eyes before. Ancient, bottomless terror. Then she blinked, and she was Emma again. 14 years old and confused. "Mom? What's wrong?" You You were crying, sweetheart. Having a nightmare. She looked genuinely puzzled. I don't remember any dream. I feel fine. I glanced toward the window she'd been staring at. Through the thin curtain I could see the outline of the forest, black against the star-scattered sky. Nothing moved, nothing seemed out of place, but I found myself reluctant to look too long. Go back to sleep, I told her, smoothing her hair. Everything's okay. But as I returned to bed, I couldn't shake the memory of that sound. It hadn't been the cry of a frightened child. It had been something else entirely. Something that spoke of loss beyond measure, of grief that had no end. The next morning dawned gray and cold, with a mist hanging between the trees like gossamer. Tom was up early, checking the RV's systems and making coffee. Emma seemed normal, chattering about the hike she wanted to take and the sketches she planned to finish. "Sleep, okay?" Tom asked me quietly while Emma was in the bathroom. I almost told him about the crying, but something held me back. "Fine," I lied. "You?" He nodded, but I noticed the dark circles under his eyes. Strange dreams. Kept thinking I heard voices outside. We decided to explore the area that morning, leaving the RV behind and following what looked like an old game trail deeper into the forest. Emma bounced ahead of us, her camera clicking constantly, while Tom and I walked in the comfortable silence we'd perfected over 17 years of marriage. The mist clung to us as we walked, dampening our clothes and muffling our footsteps. It should have been peaceful, but something about the forest felt watchful. Every shadow seemed too deep, every rustle of leaves too deliberate. I found myself looking over my shoulder constantly, though I never saw anything behind us. "Look at this," Emma called from ahead. We caught up to find her standing before a massive pine tree, its trunk easily 8 feet in diameter. But what caught my attention weren't its size. It were the markings carved into its bark. Symbols I didn't recognize, cut deep into the wood and old enough that the tree had started to heal around them. "Probably old Native American trail markers," Tom said, but he was frowning as he traced one of the symbols with his finger. Though I've never seen anything like this before. The symbols formed a rough circle around the base of the tree, maybe 20 feet in diameter. Inside that circle, the forest floor looked different, darker, as if the soil itself was richer, or older. Emma started to step inside the ring, camera raised. "Don't." The word came out sharper than I'd intended. Emma stopped, looking back at me with raised eyebrows. "I mean, let's not disturb anything. We're guests here." Tom gave me a curious look, but he nodded. "Your mom's right. Leave only footprints and all that." We continued hiking, but I couldn't stop thinking about those symbols. There had been something almost familiar about them, like half-remembered shapes from a dream. And the way the mist had seemed to swirl around that marked tree, as if it were the center of some invisible vortex. We found 2 more marked trees over the next hour, each one surrounded by the same circle of symbols, the same dark soil. Each time I felt that same instinctive reluctance to let Emma get too close. And each time the mist seemed thicker, the silence more complete. "We should head back," I said finally. The sun was still high, but something about the light felt wrong. Too diffuse, too gray. I want to get lunch started. On the way back to camp, we took a different route, following what Tom's GPS claimed was a more direct path. But after 20 minutes of walking, we emerged into a clearing I didn't recognize. In the center stood another cabin. This one was in better condition than the one we'd seen from the road, but it was clearly abandoned. The windows were dark and empty, and weeds grew up through gaps in the porch floorboards. But what made my stomach clench was the garden. Surrounding the cabin was what had once been a cultivated space. Neat rows where vegetables had grown. A trellis for climbing plants, even a small greenhouse. But everything was wrong. The vegetables had grown into twisted, unrecognizable shapes. The greenhouse glass was black with some kind of growth. And in the center of it all was a scarecrow, or something that might have been a scarecrow once. It hung on a crooked post, dressed in clothes that had once been human but were now little more than rotting fabric. But it was the face that made Emma gasp and step closer to Tom. The head was a burlap sack, but someone had painted features on it: eyes, nose, mouth, in what looked like dried blood, and those painted eyes seemed to track our movement as we stood at the edge of the clearing. "Let's go," Tom said quietly. "Now." We backtracked quickly, and this time Tom's GPS led us straight back to our camp. But as we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Not by anything I could see or hear, the forest remained unnaturally quiet, but by something that kept pace with us just beyond the edge of vision. That afternoon, while Emma sketched and Tom tried to get better cell reception for his weather app, I found myself staring at the tree line. The mist had never fully lifted, and in that gray half-light the forest looked different than it had the day before. Older. More aware. "Rebecca?" Tom's voice made me jump. "You okay?" I realized I'd been standing motionless for several minutes, just staring at the trees. "Yeah, sorry. Just thinking." He walked over, following my gaze. "Thinking about what?" "Those symbols. The cabins. This whole place feels—" I struggled for the right word. "Occupied." Tom was quiet for a moment. Then, "You want to pack up? We could drive back toward the main campground. Find something more conventional." I looked at Emma, bent over her sketch pad with intense concentration, then at our RV with its cheerful awning and the comfortable camp we'd made. Everything looked so normal, so safe. Maybe I was just being paranoid. "No," I said finally. "We're probably just not used to being this far from civilization. Let's give it another day." But as evening fell and we prepared dinner, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I caught Emma glancing toward the trees repeatedly, her usual chatter subdued. Tom kept checking his phone, though we all knew there was no signal. "Mom," Emma said as we sat down to eat, "do you think there are other people out here?" "What do you mean, sweetheart?" I keep thinking I see someone. In the trees. But when I look directly, there's nothing there." Tom and I exchanged glances. "Probably just shadows," he said. "The light plays tricks in dense forest." But I'd seen it too. That sense of movement just at the edge of perception. Gone the instant you turned to look. And as full darkness settled over our camp, the feeling intensified. We built up the campfire higher than necessary, its light pushing back the shadows but somehow making the darkness beyond seem even more impenetrable. Emma sat close to Tom, her usual independence replaced by something approaching fear. None of us talked much, and when we did, our voices seemed to get swallowed by the night. Around 10 o'clock, Tom's phone chimed. We all jumped. In the hours of silence, the sound was as shocking as a gunshot. Tom fumbled for the device, his face illuminated by its glow. "Text message," he said, frowning. "But that's impossible. No signal up here." "What does it say?" Emma asked. Tom's frown deepened. He turned the phone so we could see the screen. The message was from an unknown number, just a string of digits I didn't recognize. But it wasn't the sender that made my blood run cold. It was the message itself. "She's been waiting so long. Don't disappoint her." "That's weird," Emma said, but I could hear the tremor in her voice. Tom was already checking his phone's settings, looking for some explanation. Must be some kind of delayed delivery. Maybe it bounced off a cell tower hours ago and just came through. But as he spoke, another message appeared. Same unknown number. "The trees remember everything." Then another. "You found the marks. You understand now." "Turn it off," I said quietly. Tom looked at me. "What?" "Turn the phone off. Now." He hesitated, then powered down the device. The screen went black, leaving us with only the flickering firelight and the weight of watching darkness. "What do you think?" Emma started to ask. A sound cut her off. From somewhere in the forest around us came a long, mournful cry. The same keening I'd heard from Emma the night before. But this time, it was coming from outside the RV, from multiple directions at once, as if a chorus of voices had taken up that wordless lament. The sound went on, rising and falling in waves that seemed to penetrate not just my ears but my bones. Emma grabbed Tom's arm, and I found myself moving closer to the fire, as if its light could offer protection against something that might not be entirely physical. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the crying stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. It was absolute, oppressive, as if every living thing in the forest had died in that instant. Even our fire seemed to burn more quietly, its flames smaller and somehow less substantial. "We need to leave," Emma whispered. "Right now." Tom stood up, and I could see him fighting his own fear to be the calm adult, the responsible father. "Let's not panic. Animals make all sorts of sounds at night. Could have been coyotes or—" His words were cut off by the sound of footsteps. Not the random crashes of large animals moving through underbrush, but deliberate, measured steps circling our campsite just beyond the reach of the firelight. As we listened, frozen, the footsteps multiplied. 2 sets became 4, then 6, then so many I couldn't count them all. They walked in a perfect circle around our camp, maintaining the same distance, the same steady pace. Human footsteps, but wrong somehow. Too light in some places, too heavy in others, as if whoever was making them couldn't quite remember how walking was supposed to work. "Who's out there?" Tom called, his voice cracking slightly. The footsteps stopped. In the silence that followed, I could hear my own heartbeat, Emma's rapid breathing, the hiss and pop of burning wood. Then, from the darkness directly behind our RV, came a voice. "Rebecca." It was my voice. Not similar. Identical. As if I were standing out there in the forest calling my own name. Emma's grip on Tom's arm tightened. "Mom?" I shook my head, unable to speak, because from another direction came Tom's voice. "Emma. Come here, Emma." And from a third direction, Emma's voice, young and frightened. "Help me. Please help me." The voices continued, calling back and forth in the darkness, having conversations we'd never had, saying words we'd never spoken, but always in our own voices, always with that slight wrongness that made my skin crawl. "Get in the RV," Tom said quietly. "Now." We moved as one toward the door, keeping close together, the fire at our backs. But as Tom reached for the handle, all the voices stopped at once. In the sudden silence, I could hear something else, a wet, sliding sound like something large moving through mud. Tom got the door open and we tumbled inside. He slammed it shut behind us, engaging both the regular lock and the deadbolt. Emma immediately went to the windows, pulling the curtains closed while I checked that all the other openings were secure. "What's happening?" Emma asked, her voice small and scared. Before either Tom or I could answer, something scratched at the RV's walls. Long, deliberate scrapes that moved slowly from front to back, as if whatever was making them was taking its time, savoring our fear. The scratching moved to the roof next, directly overhead. We stood frozen in the narrow aisle, looking up at the ceiling as something walked across it with that same too careful gait we'd heard in the forest. Whatever it was heavy enough to make the RV rock slightly with each step. Then came the tapping on the windows. Not random impacts, but a rhythmic pattern. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. It started at the front windshield, moved to the passenger side, then to the back, then to the driver's side, as if something was walking around the RV and checking each window in turn. "Please," Emma whispered, though I don't think she even realized she'd spoken. The tapping stopped. For a long moment, we waited in tense silence. Then Tom's phone powered itself back on. The screen glowed in the darkness of the RV, and immediately messages began flooding in. Dozens of them, all from that same unknown number, appearing faster than anyone could type. "She knows you're in there. She can smell your fear. She's been so lonely, so very lonely. The others didn't stay. They ran. But you're different. You found the marks. You understand. You belong here now. With us, forever." Tom frantically tried to turn the phone off, but it wouldn't respond to his touches. The messages kept coming, faster and faster, until they became a blur of text scrolling up the screen. Then the screen went black, and in the sudden darkness we heard the RV's engine start. "I didn't do that," Tom said, his voice tight with panic. "The keys are in my pocket." But the engine was definitely running, and as we stood there in shock, I felt the RV begin to move. Not forward or backward, but side to side, as if something incredibly strong was rocking us back and forth. The rocking grew more violent, and things began falling from cabinets and shelves. Emma lost her balance and fell against the dinette table. Tom reached for the driver's seat, maybe thinking he could take control somehow, but the movement threw him sideways. Then, as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The engine cut off, the rocking ceased, and we were left in absolute silence once again. But now, something was different. I could feel it, even if I couldn't identify what had changed. The RV felt larger somehow. When I looked toward the front windshield, it seemed farther away than it should be. And the walls, had they always been that dark color? "Tom," I said quietly, "turn on a light." He fumbled for the wall switch near the dinette. When the LED strips flickered to life, Emma screamed. We weren't in our RV anymore. Oh, the basic layout was the same. Dinette, kitchen area, bed in the back. But everything was wrong. The walls were covered in that same dark wood paneling from the abandoned cabins, and symbols had been carved into every surface. The same symbols we'd seen on the trees, but fresh, as if they'd just been cut. And covering every inch of the walls, from floor to ceiling, were photographs. Hundreds of them. Thousands. All in black and white, all showing the same clearing we'd camped in but taken over what looked like decades. The photos showed different groups. Families, couples, lone campers. Always with that same look of terror we must have had on our faces now. But in every photo, standing just at the edge of the frame, was the same figure. A woman in a white dress, her long hair hanging over her face, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. In the older photos, she was barely visible, just a pale shape among the trees. But as the photos got more recent, she grew clearer, more substantial, as if each group of visitors had somehow fed her, made her stronger. In the most recent photos, the ones that showed people I realized must have been here just weeks ago, she was standing right behind the terrified campers, her face clearly visible above their shoulders. It was a beautiful face, or had been once, but the features were wrong, twisted by something that might have been madness or might have been something worse. And the eyes were completely black, like holes burned through the world. "We have to get out of here," Tom said, but his voice sounded strange, distant. I turned to look at him and froze. He was still there, still recognizably Tom, but something was different. His face was too pale, his eyes too bright, and when he moved, it was with that same careful, unnatural gait we'd been hearing all night. "Tom?" I whispered. He smiled, but it wasn't his smile. It was too wide, showing too many teeth, and it never reached his eyes. "She's been waiting so long, Rebecca. She gets lonely, you see. Out here all by herself. The others never stayed very long." His voice was his, but the words weren't. The tone, the cadence, it was all wrong. I looked at Emma, and my heart stopped. She was changing too, her young face taking on that same pale, too still quality. But she was fighting it. I could see the real Emma still there, terrified and struggling against whatever was happening to her. "Mom," she gasped. "Something's wrong. I can feel her inside my head." The photographs on the walls began to move. Not like film or video, but with the stuttering motion of old flip books. The terrified families in the pictures were running now, fleeing through the forest. But the woman in white was always right behind them, getting closer with each frame. And in the newest photos that hadn't been there moments before, I saw us. Tom, Emma, and myself standing around our campfire, oblivious to the pale figure watching from the trees behind us. "She wants you to stay," not Tom said, still wearing that horrible smile. "She wants us all to stay. Forever and ever and ever." I grabbed Emma's hand. She was ice cold, but she gripped my fingers with desperate strength. "Fight it," I told her. "Don't let her in." But even as I said the words, I could feel something scratching at the edges of my own mind. A presence that was ancient and hungry and so very, very lonely. It wanted to crawl inside me, to wear my thoughts and memories like a comfortable old coat. The RV door stood open now, though I hadn't seen it open. Beyond it, the forest waited, but it wasn't the same forest we'd entered. The trees were taller, more twisted, and between them moved pale shapes that might have been people once. Not Tom took a step toward us. "Come on, Rebecca. Don't make this harder than it has to be. She just wants to not be alone anymore. Is that so wrong?" Emma's grip on my hand tightened. "Mom, I can see her. She's right behind you." I didn't turn around. I couldn't, because I could feel her there, that presence of overwhelming sadness and need and rage. She was so close I could smell her. Earth and decay and something sweetly sick, like flowers left too long in water. "The keys," I whispered to Emma. "Where are the keys?" Tom's pocket, but he wasn't Tom anymore. Not entirely. And getting to them would mean getting close to him, close to that thing wearing his face. Emma seemed to understand. Her artist's eye had always been quick, and now she was looking around the transformed RV with calculating intensity. "The emergency exit," she breathed, "above the bed." The RV rocked again, gently this time, like a boat at anchor. Through the open door, I could see more figures emerging from between the trees. Men, women, children, all with that same pale, too-still quality. All with those black, empty eyes. Previous campers, I realized. All the people in the photographs. They hadn't escaped. They'd become part of her collection, part of her family of the lonely and lost. "You can't run," Not Tom said, and his voice was layered now, as if multiple people were speaking through him. "She's everywhere here, in the trees, in the soil, in the very air you breathe. This is her place, and you're her guests now." I looked at Emma. She was still fighting, still herself, but I could see the struggle in her eyes. Whatever process was taking Tom was working on her too, and I didn't know how long she could resist. "When I say run," I whispered, "head for the emergency exit. Don't stop. Don't look back." Emma nodded, her young face set with grim determination. "Run." We broke toward the back of the RV, but not Tom moved to intercept us. His movements were wrong, too fluid, like something that had learned to mimic human motion but had never quite mastered it. Emma ducked under his reaching arms and scrambled up onto the bed. I was right behind her, but cold fingers wrapped around my ankle. The grip was impossibly strong, and when I looked back, not Tom's face had changed even more. The features were melting, shifting, becoming something that was no longer human at all. Through the dissolving mask of my ex-husband's face, I could see something ancient and hungry and utterly alien. Emma had the emergency exit open. Cold night air rushed in, carrying with it the sound of footsteps, dozens of them, all converging on the RV. "Mom!" I kicked backward with my free leg, connecting with not Tom's face. The impact felt like hitting wet clay, and my foot came away covered in something dark and sticky. But the grip loosened, and I scrambled up onto the bed. Emma was already through the exit. I followed, tumbling out into the night just as pale hands reached through the opening behind me. We hit the ground running. The forest around us was alive with movement. Shapes flitting between the trees, keeping pace with us as we ran, but they seemed reluctant to leave the shadows, and as long as we stayed in the patches of moonlight, we remained just out of reach. Behind us, I could hear the woman in white for the first time. Not the keening cry from before, but words, spoken in a voice like wind through dead leaves. "Don't leave me alone. Please don't leave me alone again." The voice was filled with such desperate sadness that for a moment I almost stopped. Almost turned back. But Emma's hand in mine kept me moving forward, kept me focused on escape instead of the overwhelming grief that seemed to permeate the very air. We ran through the forest for what felt like hours, following what might have been a path or might have been wishful thinking. The pale figures followed, always just at the edge of sight, never quite catching up but never falling behind either. And through it all, that voice kept calling, come back to me. I'll take such good care of you." Finally, when my lungs were burning and Emma was stumbling with exhaustion, we saw lights ahead. Real lights, not the cold phosphorescence that seemed to emanate from the things following us. The lights of civilization, a gas station, a diner, the blessed glow of electric signs and street lamps. We burst out of the tree line onto a paved road, and the difference was immediate. The oppressive weight of being watched lifted. The shadows became ordinary shadows again, and the air tasted of car exhaust and French fries instead of decay and ancient sadness. Emma collapsed onto the roadside gravel, gasping. I looked back toward the forest, expecting to see our pursuers emerging from the trees. But there was nothing. Just ordinary pines swaying in an ordinary breeze, innocent of any malevolent presence. But I could still hear her, faint now but unmistakable, carried on the wind. So lonely, so very lonely. The police didn't believe us, of course. They took a report about our stolen RV, but when they went to investigate the coordinates Tom had programmed into his GPS, they found nothing but empty forest. No clearing, no stream, no RV. The coordinates themselves, when they checked them later, turned out to point to a spot that was marked on all the topographical maps as a small lake. But there was no lake there either. Tom never came home. The official report lists him as a missing person, presumably lost in the Fish Lake National Forest during a camping trip. The search teams found no trace of him, no sign that he'd ever been there at all. Emma and I moved to California 6 months later. We told everyone it was for a fresh start after the divorce, a chance to begin again somewhere new. We didn't tell them about the dreams we both had, night after night. Dreams of a pale woman in a white dress, standing at the edge of our vision, reaching out with desperate fingers. We didn't tell them about the text messages that still come to our phones sometimes from numbers that don't exist, all saying the same thing. Come back. Please come back. We didn't tell them about the photos Emma finds mixed in with her artwork sometimes. Black and white images of a forest clearing that shouldn't exist, showing two figures running between the trees while something pale and hungry follows close behind. And we especially didn't tell them about the nights when I wake up to find Emma standing at her bedroom window, staring out at the California hills, her lips moving silently. When I ask her what she's doing, she always says the same thing. I can hear her calling, but the thing that scares me most, the thing that wakes me up at 3 in the morning in a cold sweat, is the growing certainty that someday Emma's going to answer. Because late at night when the house is quiet and the world seems very far away, I can hear her too. That voice like wind through dead leaves, carried impossible distances on currents of loneliness and need. Come back to me. Come back and never leave again. And sometimes, God help me, sometimes I want to. The rental company eventually wrote off the RV as theft and collected the insurance money. But I still get bills sometimes, forwarded from our old address in Utah. Bills for damage to the vehicle for mysterious charges that make no sense. Cleaning fee, $847 carpet replacement, $1,200, wall restoration, $12,400 on removal of organic matter, $950, and I throw them away without opening them now. But I kept the first one, and sometimes I take it out and look at the itemized charges. At the bottom, in small print, is a note that makes my hands shake every time I read it. Vehicle recovered from Fish Lake National Forest, grid reference 39.261990° N, 111.5801 W. Condition: heavily damaged. Evidence of habitation by unknown parties. Multiple biological samples collected and disposed of per Department of Health guidelines. Recommend complete vehicle replacement. Those are the exact coordinates Tom had programmed into his GPS. The coordinates that, according to the police, point to empty forest. But the rental company found something there. Something they had to clean up. Something biological that they disposed of according to Health Department guidelines. I've never told Emma about those bills. She has enough nightmares already. But last week, she came to me with a news article she'd found online. It was dated just 3 days earlier. Family of 4 reported missing in Utah National Forest Richfield, UT. The Weber County Sheriff's Department has issued a missing persons alert for the Morrison family of Denver, Colorado, last seen entering the Fish Lake National Forest area on Tuesday morning. James Morrison, 42, his wife Sarah, 38, and their twin daughters, aged 16, were reported overdue by family members after failing to return from a planned 4-day camping trip. The family was traveling in a rented recreational vehicle and had indicated plans to camp in a remote area of the forest. Search and rescue teams have found no trace of the vehicle or its occupants. We're expanding our search grid daily, said Sheriff's spokesman Deputy Mike Chen. The Fish Lake area is vast and heavily forested. Unfortunately, we're dealing with some unusual atmospheric conditions that are interfering with our equipment. This marks the third family to go missing in the Fish Lake region this summer. The previous incidents involved the Patterson family in June and a group of college students in July. None have been found. Anyone with information about the Morrison family's whereabouts is asked to contact the Weber County Sheriff's Department immediately. Emma had circled something in red ink at the bottom of the article. A quote from a local park ranger. There are stories about that area going back generations. The Ute tribes avoided it, called it the place where spirits weep. Most folks nowadays don't put stock in old legends, but the ranger declined to complete his statement. Mom, Emma said quietly, I've been having the dreams again, every night for the past week. I looked at my daughter, at the dark circles under her eyes that I'd been pretending not to notice. What kind of dreams? She's not alone anymore. In the dreams, I can see them all. Dad and all the others. They're standing behind her now, in that clearing. Just standing there, waiting. Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. And Mom, she doesn't look sad anymore. She looks satisfied. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, I sat at my laptop and searched for more information about the missing families. What I found made my blood run cold. The Patterson family, David and Karen Patterson with their teenage son Michael. They'd rented an RV in Salt Lake City, told the rental agent they were heading to a remote spot they'd found on a camping forum. The coordinates they'd left with their relatives matched Tom's exactly. The college students, 5 kids from the University of Colorado, also in a rented RV, also heading to the same coordinates. The Morrison family, same story, same RV rental company, same impossible coordinates. And, going back further, I found more. Scattered reports over the years of missing campers, hikers who never returned, families who simply vanished in that section of the Fish Lake. Always the same area. Always near those coordinates that officially pointed to nothing but empty forest. I cross-referenced the reports with local news archives and found something else. Every few years, there would be a brief mention of equipment malfunctions in the forest. GPS devices leading search and rescue teams in circles. Compasses spinning wildly. Radio communications cutting out. And always, the same quote from different park rangers over the years. There are stories about that area going back generations. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about Emma's dreams, about the bills from the rental company, about the certainty growing in my chest like a tumor. She wasn't just collecting them anymore. She was building something. A family of her own, assembled from all the lost and lonely souls who'd wandered into her domain. And every new arrival made her stronger, more substantial, more able to reach out into the world beyond her forest. The next morning, I found Emma in the kitchen, standing at the window with that same distant expression I'd been seeing more and more lately. "We have to go back," she said without turning around. "Emma, no. Absolutely not. She has Dad." Emma's voice was flat, emotionless. "She has all of them. And she's making them do things, Mom. Terrible things. To the new people who come." She finally turned to face me, and her eyes held depths no 14-year-old should possess. She's teaching them to hunt. That's just dreams, sweetheart. Nightmares from trauma. It's not dreams. Emma pulled her phone from her pocket and showed me the screen. A text message from Tom's number, timestamp from 20 minutes ago. "Emma, come home. Your family is waiting." Below that, another message. "We miss you. Don't you miss us?" And another. "She says you're special. She says you can see things others can't. She needs you." I grabbed the phone, my hands shaking. "We're changing our numbers. Today. And we're moving again. It won't matter." Emma's voice was eerily calm. "She can reach anywhere now. She's not just in the forest anymore, Mom. She's in the phones, in the dreams, in the spaces between things. And every person she takes makes her stronger. As if to prove Emma's point, my own phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Hello, Rebecca. I have something that belongs to you." Attached was a photo. Tom, standing in that familiar clearing, but changed. His skin was pale as birch bark, his eyes were black holes, and his smile stretched wider than any human mouth should go. Behind him stood others, the Patterson family, the college students, dozens of people I didn't recognize but who all had that same terrible, empty-eyed smile. And in the center of them all, the woman in white. But she wasn't pale and translucent anymore. She looked solid, real, almost human, almost alive. Another message appeared. "He asks about you constantly. They all do. You're all they talk about." Then another. "But I think you know that. I think you can hear them calling, just like Emma can." "We run," I said, grabbing Emma's arm. "Right now. We pack only what we need and we go." But Emma didn't move. She was staring at her phone as new messages flooded in. Dozens of them. All from different numbers, but all saying variations of the same thing. "Come home. We're waiting. Don't you miss us. She's lonely. We're all so lonely. Running won't work anymore," Emma said softly. "She's learning. Every person she takes teaches her something new about our world, about how to reach beyond her boundaries." She looked up at me with eyes that seemed far too old. The college kids taught her about technology. The Patterson family taught her about social media. And Dad, what did Dad teach her? Emma's expression broke my heart. Dad taught her about love, about family, about how much it hurts to lose someone. That afternoon, while I was packing our emergency bags, Emma disappeared. I found her in her room an hour later, but she was sitting on her bed with her eyes closed, motionless as a statue. When I shook her, she didn't respond. Her skin was ice cold, and her breathing was so shallow I had to hold a mirror under her nose to see it fog. On her nightstand, her phone displayed a video call. The screen showed that familiar clearing in the forest, but it was different now. Changed. The trees were taller, more twisted, and they seemed to move even though there was no wind. In the center of the clearing stood all of them. Tom, the missing families, the college students, all watching the camera with those black, empty eyes, and walking among them, tending to them like a shepherd with her flock, was the woman in white. She looked directly into the camera, directly at me, and smiled with lips that were too red and too wide. "Hello, Rebecca," she said, and her voice came not from the phone's speaker but from Emma's mouth. "We've been waiting for you." Emma's eyes snapped open, but they weren't Emma's eyes anymore. They were black holes, just like all the others. "Don't fight it," Emma said in a voice that layered her own words with the whispers of dozens of others. "It doesn't hurt, and you'll never be lonely again." I ran. I left my daughter sitting in that room, left her with that thing speaking through her, and I ran. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, abandoning my child to save myself. But what was looking out through Emma's eyes wasn't my daughter anymore. I drove for 18 hours straight, stopping only for gas and coffee, always looking in my rearview mirror for signs of pursuit. I ended up in a motel in Oregon, paying cash and using a fake name, trying to figure out what to do next. That's where I am now, writing this account on a laptop I bought at a pawn shop, using the motel's Wi-Fi to upload it to every forum and blog site I can find. Maybe someone will read this and understand. Maybe someone will know what to do. The thing in the forest, the woman in white, she's not just collecting people anymore. She's learning from them, growing stronger, expanding her reach. She has technology now, knowledge of our world and how it works. She has my daughter, and she wants me to come home. The messages never stop. Different numbers every time, but always the same pleas. "Come back. Emma misses you. We're a family. Don't you want to see Tom again?" Sometimes the messages include photos, pictures of Emma, but wrong. Too pale, too still, with those terrible black eyes. Pictures of Tom standing in the forest, gesturing for me to join him. Pictures of the clearing, growing larger every day as the woman's influence spreads. But it's the videos that hurt the most. Videos of Emma, sitting in what looks like our old house in Utah but can't possibly be, speaking in her own voice. "Mom, please come home. I know you're scared, but it's okay here. She takes care of us. We don't hurt anymore. We don't worry anymore. We just are. Together. Forever." The videos are always time-stamped as live, but that's impossible. Our house in Utah was sold months ago to a family from Phoenix. I've checked. Last night I made the mistake of calling that family, pretending to be from a survey company. The woman who answered sounded tired and stressed. "Oh, the house is fine," she said when I asked how they were settling in. "It's just, well, this might sound crazy, but we keep having problems with the previous owner's daughter. She keeps showing up, asking to come inside. Sweet kid, but we've explained that we live here now." "What does she look like?" I asked, though I already knew. "Blonde hair, maybe 14 or 15 years old. Very pale. She has the most unusual eyes." The woman paused. "The thing is, she only shows up at night, and always when it's foggy. And she never quite... I mean, when you look at her directly, she seems a little off. Like a photograph that's slightly out of focus." I hung up without another word. Emma is spreading. The woman in white is using her, using all of them to extend her reach beyond the forest. They're appearing in our old home, in the places we used to live, drawing more people into her web. This morning, I received a package at the motel. No return address, but I knew what it would contain before I opened it. Inside was a single photograph. It showed me, sitting in this motel room, typing on this laptop. But I wasn't alone in the photo. Standing behind my chair, barely visible in the image, was Emma. Or what Emma had become. She was smiling, that too wide smile, her black eyes fixed on the camera. On me, and written on the back of the photo in Emma's handwriting, "Found you. They're coming." I can feel it in the growing cold of the room, in the way the shadows seem deeper than they should be, in the fog that's rolling in under the door despite the fact that it's a clear night outside. I don't know if this account will help anyone. I don't know if there's any way to stop what she's become or save the people she's taken. But I had to try to warn others, to leave some record of what really happened in the Fish Lake National Forest. If you're reading this and you've been getting messages from unknown numbers, if you've been having dreams about a woman in white, if someone you know has suggested a camping trip to remote coordinates in Utah, don't go. Don't believe them, even if they sound like people you love, especially if they sound like people you love. The fog is getting thicker now, and I can hear footsteps in the hallway outside. Familiar footsteps. Tom's measured stride, Emma's lighter steps. They've come to take me home. Part of me wants to run again, to fight, to somehow find a way to save Emma and Tom and all the others. But another part of me, a part that grows stronger with each passing moment, just wants to stop running, to stop being afraid, to stop being alone. I can hear Emma's voice now, drifting through the fog. "Mom, we're here. We came to get you. You don't have to be scared anymore." And behind her, Tom's voice, warm and loving as it used to be. "Come on, Rebecca. Let's go home. We're a family again." The door is opening now. I can see them through the fog. Emma and Tom, pale and beautiful and wrong, with their black eyes and their too wide smiles. Behind them stand all the others, the growing collection of the lost and the lonely, all united in their terrible contentment. And walking among them, tending to her flock, is the woman in white. She looks at me with something that might be compassion if it weren't for those empty, hungry eyes. "You see?" she says in her voice like wind through dead leaves. "No one ever has to be alone again. I should run. I should fight. I should try to escape. But I'm so tired of running. So tired of being afraid. So tired of missing my daughter and my ex-husband and all the might-have-beens that slip away like smoke." Emma is holding out her hand to me, and her smile is the same smile she's had since she was 5 years old. Almost the same. "Come on, Mom. Let's go home." I'm reaching for her hand now. Her fingers are cold but familiar, and when I touch them, all the fear melts away. All the loneliness, all the pain, all the desperate struggle to survive in a world that seems designed to break us. She was right. We don't hurt anymore. We don't worry anymore. We just are, together, forever. This account was found on 17 different internet forums and blog sites, all posted from the same IP address registered to the Sleepy Time Motel in Bend, Oregon. When police investigated, they found room 247 empty except for a laptop computer and a single photograph. The photograph showed the room's occupant, identified as Rebecca Hill of Sacramento, California, sitting at the desk, typing. Standing behind her in the photo was what appeared to be a young girl, though the image was too blurred to make out specific features. Ms. Hill's vehicle was found in the motel parking lot, keys still in the ignition. Despite extensive searches of the surrounding area, no trace of Rebecca Hill has been found. The Weber County Sheriff's Department reports that the search for the Morrison family and other missing persons in the Fish Lake National Forest region continues. However, they have issued an advisory recommending that recreational vehicles avoid certain remote areas of the forest due to unusual atmospheric conditions that may interfere with navigation equipment. The coordinates referenced in Ms. Hill's account continue to show as empty forest on all official maps. They warned us. Locals always do, but we laughed. My name's Marcus Fletcher. I had just turned 34 when we arrived at the Bonneville Salt Flats, and it was the worst mistake of our lives. The idea for the RV trip came from Sarah, my wife of 8 years. She'd been working 70-hour weeks at the law firm, and I'd been pulling double shifts at the plant. We needed this. A month on the road, just us and our German Shepherd, Rex, exploring the American West in our brand-new Winnebago Adventurer. Think of it as a second honeymoon, Sarah had said, her green eyes sparkling with the kind of excitement I hadn't seen since our wedding day. Just you, me, and the open road. The Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah seemed like the perfect place to start. Vast, alien, otherworldly. The kind of landscape that makes you feel small and infinite at the same time. What we didn't know was that some places are meant to make you feel small for a reason. We'd been on the road for 3 days when we reached the outskirts of the flats. The sun was setting, painting the endless white expanse in shades of orange and pink. Sarah pressed her face to the passenger window like a child. "It's beautiful," she whispered. I had to agree. The salt flats stretched out like a frozen ocean, perfectly flat and blindingly white, broken only by distant mountains that looked like they were floating in the sky. But there was something else. A quality to the silence that felt too absolute, too hungry. Rex whined from his spot behind us, his ears flattened against his head. "Easy, boy," I said, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. "Just a new place." But Rex wasn't easily spooked. 3 years of camping trips and hiking trails, and he'd never reacted like this to a new environment. We pulled into what the GPS marked as a designated camping area. Though area was generous. It was just a dirt pullout next to the salt flats, marked by a weathered sign that read, "Primitive camping, no services, camp at your own risk." As I parked the RV, Sarah was already scrolling through her phone, taking pictures of the sunset, but her smile faded as she looked at the screen. "That's weird," she muttered. "What?" She showed me the phone. The photo she'd just taken showed the salt flats, the mountains, the RV. But there was something else, a dark shape in the distance, tall and thin, like a person standing alone on the white expanse. I looked out the window. Nothing there. "Probably just a shadow from the mountains," I said, but I didn't believe it. The shadows were all pointing the wrong direction. We set up camp as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, plunging the flats into a darkness so complete it felt solid. Sarah started a fire in the portable pit while I leveled the RV and connected our solar battery system. Rex stayed close to Sarah, his eyes constantly scanning the darkness beyond our small circle of light. "You know what I love about this?" Sarah said, settling into her camping chair with a glass of wine. "No cell service, no internet, no work emails, just us." I should have felt the same relief, but something about the absolute silence bothered me. No insects, no birds, no distant traffic. Nothing. Just the occasional whisper of wind across the salt, and even that sounded wrong, like breathing. "Did you read about this place before we came?" I asked. Sarah nodded. "A little. It's an ancient lake bed. Used to be called Lake Bonneville. Covered most of Utah. Then it dried up, left all this salt behind." She gestured at the endless white expanse. "Oh, and they use it for land speed records. People try to break the sound barrier out here." "Anything else?" She was quiet for a moment, swirling her wine. "There were some stories. Native American tribes considered it cursed. Said something lived under the salt, something that feeds on..." She trailed off. "Feeds on what? Dreams, I think, or memories. The stories weren't clear." She laughed, but it sounded forced. "Probably just folklore to keep people away from a dangerous place. You could walk out there and disappear. No landmarks, no way to find your way back." Rex suddenly stood, his hackles raised, staring out into the darkness. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "Rex, what is it?" Sarah reached for him, but he stepped away, his attention fixed on something we couldn't see. That's when I heard it. A sound like footsteps on salt. A soft crunching that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Rex's growl deepened. "Hello," I called out, grabbing a flashlight. "Anyone there?" The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was so complete it hurt my ears. Sarah moved closer to me. "Maybe we should go inside. It's probably just another camper," I said, but as I swept the flashlight beam across the salt flats, I saw nothing but endless white stretching to the horizon. No other RVs, no tents, no signs of human presence. The footsteps resumed, closer now, circling our campsite just beyond the reach of our fire's light. Rex barked once, sharp and urgent, then whimpered and pressed himself against Sarah's legs. "Inside. Now," I said. We extinguished the fire and retreated to the RV, Rex practically pushing us toward the door. I locked it behind us and pulled the curtains closed, though I kept peeking through them at the darkness outside. "I'm sure it's nothing," Sarah said, but she was checking the locks on all the windows. We tried to settle in for the night, but sleep felt impossible. Every creak of the RV settling, every whisper of wind, sounded like something trying to get in. Rex positioned himself by the door, alert and tense. Around 3 a.m., I finally dozed off in the driver's seat, my head resting against the window. That's when the dreams started. I was standing alone on the salt flats under a moonless sky. The white ground beneath my feet glowed with its own light, stretching infinitely in all directions. In the distance, I could see figures, dozens of them, standing motionless like scarecrows. As I watched, they began to move toward me with that same soft, crunching footstep sound. But they weren't walking. They were sliding across the salt, their feet never lifting, leaving no tracks. The closest figure resolved into a woman in a tattered dress, her skin pale as the salt beneath our feet. Her eyes were black pits, and when she opened her mouth, sand poured out instead of words. I tried to run, but my feet wouldn't move. The salt had turned soft and sticky, holding me in place while the figures closed in. More sand spilled from their mouths, forming words I almost understood. Join us. Stay. Become. I woke with a gasp to find Sarah shaking me. "Marcus, wake up. Something's wrong with Rex." Our dog was standing rigid by the door, his eyes rolled back white, his body trembling. A thin line of drool hung from his mouth, and he was making a sound I'd never heard before. Not quite a whine, not quite a growl, but something in between that made my skin crawl. "Rex, here, boy." I approached him slowly, but he didn't react. It was like he was seeing something we couldn't. Sarah grabbed my arm. "Look outside." I pulled back the curtain and immediately wished I hadn't. The salt flats were glowing. Not with reflected moonlight, but with their own phosphorescent glow that pulsed like a slow heartbeat. And scattered across the glowing surface were shapes. Dozens of them standing perfectly still, arranged in a wide circle around our RV. "What are they?" Sarah whispered. I couldn't answer. In the strange light, the figures looked human, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, their proportions subtly off. They stood without moving, without breathing, like statues waiting for something. Rex suddenly collapsed, his rigid body going limp. But he was still breathing, his eyes moving rapidly back and forth like he was dreaming. "We need to leave," I said. "Right now. What about Rex? We'll carry him." I started the engine, thankful when it turned over on the first try. The headlights swept across the salt flats as I turned the RV around, illuminating the figures for a brief moment. They weren't human. I could see that now. Their faces were smooth and featureless like mannequins, and they moved in perfect unison, turning to track our movement. But as we drove away from the camping area, I realized something was wrong. The road we'd come in on wasn't there. Instead, we were surrounded by the endless salt flats on all sides, the mountains that had been visible earlier nowhere to be seen. "Where's the road?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with panic. I checked the GPS, but it showed nothing, just a blank screen with our location marker floating in empty space. "The GPS must be malfunctioned," I said, but I could hear the uncertainty in my own voice. We drove for what felt like hours, the RV's headlights carving a path through the darkness, but the landscape never changed. Just endless white salt in every direction, punctuated by those motionless figures that appeared and disappeared at the edge of our vision. Rex remained unconscious in the back, his breathing shallow but steady. "Marcus," Sarah said quietly, "I think we're driving in circles." She was right. I'd been trying not to admit it, but we'd passed the same arrangement of rocks 3 times. Or at least rocks that looked identical. In this featureless landscape, it was impossible to tell. "Maybe we should stop," Sarah suggested. "Wait for daylight." I didn't want to stop, but we were burning through our fuel with no idea where we were going. Reluctantly, I pulled the RV to a halt and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was absolute. "At least those things aren't following us anymore," Sarah said, looking out the windows. But she was wrong. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could see them. Dozens of figures standing in a perfect circle around us, maybe 50 yards away. They hadn't followed us. They'd been waiting. "Sarah," I whispered, but she'd already seen them. She grabbed my hand, her fingers cold and trembling. "What do they want?" As if in answer to her question, the figures began to move. Not toward us, but in a slow, synchronized dance around our RV. They glided across the salt without lifting their feet, their movements hypnotic and wrong. And they were singing. It wasn't a sound we heard with our ears. It was something that seemed to resonate in our bones, a wordless melody that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. The sound was sad and hungry and old, older than the mountains, older than the lake that had once covered this place. Rex began to seize. His body convulsed violently, foam gathering at his mouth, his legs kicking against nothing. Sarah dropped to her knees beside him, trying to hold him still. "What's happening to him?" she cried. I didn't know, but I had a terrible suspicion. In my dream, the figures had been trying to communicate, and now Rex was caught between worlds, experiencing something our human minds weren't equipped to handle. The singing grew louder, more insistent, and I realized it wasn't just coming from the figures outside. It was coming from Sarah, too. She was humming along to the melody, her eyes glazed and distant, her hands moving in small, repetitive patterns in the air. "Sarah!" I shook her and her eyes snapped back into focus. What was I doing? "We need to get out of here, now." I started the engine again, but this time when I pressed the accelerator, we didn't move. I could hear the wheels spinning, but the RV stayed perfectly still. I put it in reverse, then forward again, but nothing happened. Outside, the figures had stopped dancing. They were facing us now. Their smooth faces turned toward our windows, and I could feel their attention like a weight pressing against my skull. That's when Sarah started changing. It was subtle at first, a slight pallor to her skin, a distant look in her eyes. But as the night wore on, she became less responsive, answering my questions with single words or just nods. Her skin grew cold to the touch, and when I looked closely, I could see a fine layer of white crystals forming on her arms. Salt. "Sarah, stay with me," I begged. but she was drifting away, becoming something else. Rex had stopped seizing, but he hadn't woken up. His breathing was so shallow I had to put my ear to his chest to make sure his heart was still beating. I was losing them both. The singing continued, that bone-deep melody that seemed to be rewriting the very structure of reality around us. I tried covering my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was coming from inside my head now, and I could feel my own thoughts beginning to drift. I found myself thinking about the lake that had once covered this place. Thousands of years ago, this had been water, teeming with life. Fish, birds, the whole ecosystem of a massive inland sea. And then it had dried up, leaving nothing but salt and emptiness. But what if something had been living in the deepest part of that lake? Something that had survived the drying, buried itself in the salt, and waited. The figures outside were closer now, close enough that I could see details I wished I couldn't. Their skin wasn't smooth. It was covered in the same crystalline salt formation that was spreading across Sarah's arms. And their eyes. Their eyes were holes that went deeper than their skulls should allow, tunnels leading down into something vast and hungry. Sarah stood up suddenly, her movements mechanical and wrong. Without a word, she walked to the door of the RV and began unlocking it. "Sarah, no!" I lunged for her, but she pushed me away with surprising strength. "They're calling," she said in a voice that didn't sound like hers anymore. "Can't you hear them? They've been waiting so long." She opened the door and stepped outside. The figures surrounded her immediately, but they didn't touch her. Instead, they began their dance again, and Sarah joined them, moving with the same unnatural grace, her feet sliding across the salt without lifting. I grabbed a flashlight and followed her outside, Rex tucked under my other arm. The dog was still unconscious but alive, and I wasn't leaving without him. The moment my feet touched the salt flats, I understood. This wasn't just an empty lake bed. It was a graveyard. Thousands of years of life compressed into crystalline formations beneath the surface. Every step released whispers of memory, fragments of dreams from creatures that had died when the water disappeared. And something vast and patient had been collecting those dreams, feeding on them, growing stronger. The figures weren't malevolent. They were victims, people who had wandered onto the flats and been absorbed into whatever lived beneath the salt. They danced because they had to, their movements a kind of prayer or offering to the thing that kept them conscious after death. Sarah was already changing, salt crystals spreading across her skin like frost, her movements becoming more fluid and inhuman. Soon she would be like them, aware but not alive, dancing forever under the stars. I couldn't let that happen. Setting Rex down gently, I ran towards Sarah, fighting against the hypnotic pull of the song. The salt figures tried to block my path, but they moved slowly, and I was driven by desperation. I grabbed Sarah's hand, and the shock of cold that ran up my arm nearly dropped me. Her skin was like ice, and the salt crystals were spreading faster now, reaching toward her face. "Sarah, fight it!" For a moment her eyes cleared, and I saw my wife looking back at me. "Marcus, what's happening to me?" "We're getting out of here." I half-carried, half-dragged her toward the RV, but the salt figures were closing in. Their song grew louder, more demanding, and I could feel my own resolve wavering. Part of me wanted to join the dance, to give in to the ancient hunger that pulsed beneath our feet. But then Rex barked. It was weak and confused, but it was the first sound he'd made since this nightmare began. He was awake, struggling to stand, and the sight of our dog fighting to reach us snapped me back to myself. I scooped up Rex with one arm and supported Sarah with the other, pushing toward the RV. The salt figures moved to block us, but something about Rex's presence seemed to disrupt them. Dogs see things humans can't, and maybe his consciousness was too alien for the thing beneath the salt to fully understand. We made it to the RV just as Sarah collapsed. The salt crystals had spread to her face, giving her skin a translucent mineral quality. Her breathing was shallow and irregular. I laid her on the couch and tried to think. The engine wouldn't start. Whatever was controlling this place had made sure we couldn't simply drive away, but there had to be something. That's when I remembered the solar battery system. We had enough stored power to run the RV's electrical systems for days, including the water pump. Water, the one thing this place couldn't tolerate. The reason the lake had died, the reason the salt creatures couldn't venture beyond this desiccated wasteland. I turned on every faucet in the RV, letting fresh water pour onto the floor. I soaked towels and pressed them against Sarah's crystallized skin. I even poured water from our drinking supplies directly onto the salt-encrusted windows. The effect was immediate. The salt figures outside recoiled as if I'd splashed them with acid. Their song faltered, becoming discordant and pained, and Sarah gasped, her eyes flying open. "Marcus, I'm here. We're getting out of this place." The crystals on her skin were dissolving, leaving behind angry red marks, but nothing worse. She was herself again, confused and frightened but alive. With water still pouring from the RV's faucets, I tried the engine again. This time it started, and when I pressed the accelerator, we moved. The salt figures scattered before us like startled birds, their forms becoming less solid as we drove through puddles of our own making. Behind us, I could see them reforming, but they seemed weaker somehow, less substantial. Rex had recovered enough to stand, though he stayed close to us, whimpering softly. Dogs have good instincts about these things. We drove for what felt like hours through the endless white landscape, leaving a trail of water behind us. I was beginning to think we'd used up all our fresh water supplies when Sarah pointed ahead. "Look! Mountains. Real mountains, not the phantom shapes we'd seen before, and between us and them, a ribbon of dark asphalt, the road we'd come in on." As soon as our tires hit the pavement, the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The salt flats were still there, still glowing faintly in our rearview mirror, but they no longer felt alive and hungry. They were just a dried lake bed again, empty and desolate. We drove until we reached the nearest town, a tiny place called Wendover that straddled the Nevada-Utah border. The first motel we found had vacancy, and I paid for a week up front without hesitation. It took 3 days for the salt crystals to completely disappear from Sarah's skin. She said she didn't remember much about the experience, just a feeling of being called towards something beautiful and terrible. Rex recovered faster, though he never quite lost the haunted look in his eyes. We never talked about going back to finish our cross-country trip. Instead, we drove straight home to Michigan, staying on major highways the whole way. I sold the RV the day after we got back. That was 6 months ago. Sarah's thrown herself back into her work with renewed intensity, and I've picked up even more shifts at the plant. We tell people we're saving up for a house, but the truth is we're afraid of having too much free time to think. Because sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet and Rex is sleeping, I can still hear it, that wordless song drifting across the darkness. And when I look at Sarah while she's sleeping, I sometimes see the faintest trace of crystalline patterns on her skin, visible only in certain light. I think part of us is still out there, dancing on the salt flats under the stars, and I'm terrified that someday the rest of us will join it. The doctors say Sarah's skin condition is just a reaction to mineral exposure, something that will fade with time, but I know better. I've seen the way she stares out windows sometimes, like she's looking for something specific, and once I caught her humming that melody while she worked. When I asked her about it, she said she didn't know where she'd heard it, said it just felt familiar. Rex knows. He follows Sarah everywhere now, never letting her out of his sight. Dogs understand things about the world that humans prefer to forget. They know that some hungers are older than civilization, patient as stone, and that once something has tasted you, it never really lets go. We don't camp anymore. We don't even go for walks in the woods behind our house, because I've learned that there are places in this world where the boundary between what is and what was becomes thin, where ancient things wait just beneath the surface of reality. The Bonneville Salt Flats are one of those places, and if you ever find yourself driving across Utah, if you see that endless expanse of white stretching to the horizon, don't stop. Don't camp. Don't even slow down. Just keep driving and try not to listen too hard to the wind, because it might not be wind at all.